All right, here we go with chapter 3. This is the Scotch Game sidelines. So we're going to start out with e4, e5, knight f3, knight to c6, d4, e takes d4. We will also look at d6, that'll be 2 lines. And after knight takes d4, there's a really common move here at the club level, but almost no masters play it. It's knight takes d4. What do you think about this move?
Yeah, I see it quite a bit, but it's a known inaccuracy, and it's a known very good position for white. Really easy to develop and play, and so anytime you see this move, you should be happy. We can take with the queen. I think a lot of players just take here to like, oh, they have to take with their queen and get their queen out, but there's no like good way to really attack it. I can't get at it with the bishop right now or the knight. I mean, they could play the c pawn push and saddle themselves with the backward pawn. So there's just not a whole lot going, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense when you sit down and actually calculate.
And that's usually the exception to the rule of don't bring your queen out early, is if the
hmm
queen can't be attacked, then it is okay to bring the queen out early. So the queen's sitting pretty nicely here. So we're going to start out looking at d6. This will be 2 lines. And already you can feel how passive this position is for black. That pawn on d6 blocks in the f8 bishop. So black is really having trouble getting their kingside pieces developed at this point.
Yep, and so we're just gonna not do anything fancy and just develop knight c3. The setup is gonna look pretty familiar. We're very often gonna go for the same type of setup, but slightly different bishop position in these types of line. So after knight f6, a lot of the time in this course, we've been going bishop d3, but in this line, it's not quite as accurate because knight g4 is just kind of annoying and we have to move our bishop again. So instead, we'll go bishop f4. And if they go knight h5 here, it's kind of the same concept, but then we can tuck our bishop back and we're happy again. Um, so bishop f4 is just a little bit more active and a little more accurate given this exact knight placement. So let's go bishop e7 and guess where we're castling, Matt?
I'm going queenside all day.
All day.
So queenside castle, and our play is either going to come from pawn to e5, or we're going to play f3, g4, g5, kicking the knight on f6. So black will most likely castle. And here we're going with the thematic move, pawn to f3, and pawn to g4 is coming up next. Let's look at bishop to e6 for black. And then next we'll look at c5, because that's a common idea as well, to try to get their pawns rolling to attack our king. So what do we do after bishop to e6?
Yeah, so this is another common theme that I think we talked about in chapter one. When do we go for the pawn storm and when do we take a move to tuck the king away? Here, white has not moved black has not moved any of their pawns, so we can't afford to take a move and just tuck the king away. So let's play king b1 and avoid any like checks on this diagonal, and then we're ready to really push our pawns. So king b1 is a nice prophylactic move. And black, if they know what they're doing, they're probably going to start throwing their pawns at us.
One
So
interesting point there I just wanted to mention.
yeah,
If we played g4 on the last move instead of king to b1, black can actually play c6, sacrifice this pawn, and after our queen lands on d6, play queen to a5. And they have a pretty decent attack there. But when we play king to b1, c6 now does not work well because of bishop takes d6. So taking that one prophylactic move here instead of playing g4 actually prevents a pretty nice idea for black when they want to play c6 here.
okay, that's a good one to remember.
So now that they can't play c6, what are they going to do? Pawn to a6. That's going to be the anchor to try to play pawn to b5 next. And what do we play here?
Yep, so we're going for a g4. Look how quick these pawn moves are coming too. So after g4, black is probably going to fire back with b5. And we have a very counterintuitive but very strong move here. What is it, Matt?
And I have to thank Stockfish for this one. Bishop back to c1, putting the bishop back on the starting square. Um, Black wants to play c5 and b4, and both of those moves get a tempo on one of our pieces. So this move actually helps us defend the queen side, this bishop to c1 move, and we might play b3 to stop black's pawns, and potentially bishop to b2, being kettling the bishop after all.
So, very strange way to fianchetto out of the bishop, but we will take it. So let's look at what happens if they kick our queen right away. Obviously, we want to move our queen away. We'll go to e3, and we can really support these pawn pushes with our queen as well. And also keeping an eye on e4. So if we push f4, this pawn has good defense. b4, kicking our knight, we're actually going to go back again, knight e2. Look how passive our position looks, but we have a surprise coming, sort of.
And this is the fastest attack we've seen from black in this
Mhm.
whole course so far. But if you look at our pawns, we have not pushed a single one up yet, right? So if black plays, for example, a5, a4, that's going to be too slow. Queen to a5 is the most likely move because now that puts an immediate double attack on this pawn on a2. And this is where we're going to play the move that will probably surprise black. Well, maybe it's the only move, but I think they might think it's a mistake by us. Pawn to b3. But at this point, we're actually up 2 points according to Stockfish. And our plan is to play f4, f5, g5, and attack over here on the king side. Our attack is quickly coming to life. And depending on what black plays, this knight will come out either through f4 or potentially d4 if this pawn moves. And it's a very dynamic game, but we have a +2 Stockfish eval. And I think this is one you should play around with the engine a bit and just kind of get a good feel for the position, but we do have a nice advantage here.
Yeah, say this is the most patient line we have in the course, where we're not just throwing our pawns, but let's take a few moves to get our pieces kind of under control, make sure we're not getting checkmated or anything, and then our attack is going to be quicker. It just starts on move 15 instead of move 10.
Yes, that's a good way to put it. So let's go back now to move 9. When we first played f3, we looked at bishop to e6, and we mentioned next we will look at pawn to c5, the second most popular move. This is actually a mistake, Jesse. We're looking at 3-pawn advantage here and a very quick kingside attack. So how do we capitalize on this move?
Yep, so we're going to move our queen to the same square. E3 is a nice solid square to get to. And so where does the 3 point advantage come from after uh, c5?
This pawn is going to be a big problem for black. So we have our bishop on f4 lined up with it, the rook on d1, and we also have this idea of playing pawn to e5, utilizing the pin on the d file. So let's say, for example, black plays queen to b6, trying to get the queen off of the d file, breaking that pin on d6. Now we can play g4 with a very straightforward attack, and look at how black's attack was immediately slowed down by putting the queen out here. So let's say bishop to e6 for black. Now we play pawn to h4. We're going to keep pushing the pawns. We have an idea of knight to d5 in mind as well. And if this e pawn, for example, ends up on d5, then there's bishop to d3, hitting the pawn on h7. So again, 3 or even a 3.5 point advantage for white here.
Yep, another one of those positions where it looked like black played pretty normal, and Stockfish just finds a win, which is pretty crazy. It's interesting to note too that Queen B6, it looks nice as pointing at this pawn, but it's kind of blocking their own pawns, and it's harder to attack us. So, uh, not a great move, even though it looks good optically.
That's a mistake I've made before in an OTB game. It was actually a Tartakower from the black side. I brought the queen out in front of my pawns with opposite side castling. And really, you don't want to do that unless there's a really strong reason behind it where maybe you can provoke a weakness. More often than not, you want to lead with the pawns in those types of opposite side castling positions. All right, so now let's look at knight to f6. A popular move, and this is actually a large blunder, and it's a very thematic way to take care of this move.
Yeah, this is a fun one. So E5, and black needs to play super, super duper accurately, or they're just gonna lose. They're just gonna lose. So where are they gonna go with the knight? Well, nowhere for now. They're gonna put the queen out to pin this pawn so we can't capture. Let's break the pin in a fancy way, developing a piece. Bishop e3. Now we're free to capture again, and the yeah, renewing this threat. So the knight's got to go somewhere. knight g8, and we can just develop. Notice this queen placement. That is a big target for our knight. So knight up, can't draw arrows. Knight up, and we're already on the queen. So simple development, and our pieces are just swarming so quickly.
I love how you keep saying knight up when, if you look at the stockfish eval, we are already up essentially at knight. I mean, this is great position. So knight c3, compare this to other lines and we're up a couple moves. Really good development. So let's say d6 by black, like Jesse mentioned, we're going knight d5 right away, hitting the queen, hitting the pawn on c7. Queen d7, that's blocking in this bishop. Now we can play e takes d6. Queen takes d6, we have bishop to f4, hitting the queen in this pawn. And if bishop takes d6, what do we play here for the
Let's
knockout?
win. Let's win a rook, shall we? So queen takes g7, and this rook is indefensible. There's nowhere the bishop or queen can go to defend it. And that's just a rook, and that's the game. That's over. +10.